So if you keep on seeing this, the multiple news comings out talking about the X organization being hacked and so on. The latest was last week when Australia came out and told that their spy HQ headquarters entire blueprint was been hacked by China. 3 months back, South Korea came out and told that, I mean, they had a similar type of attack, and then their data was been compromised, and then they traced it back towards China. In Jan, New York Times came and told they had like 45 different variants of malware sitting in their organization, and the AV was only able to detect only one variant. So this problem about the advanced targeted attack is not only a US-based problem. This has been happening to all geographic, to all countries, to all governments, to all organizations. And why it is happening, and that's what we are going to cover in next few slides. So it's not only the news or the media, but even if you look at any security report which came out in 2012, you'll see the cybercrime making a point over there. The semantic cybercrime report talked about this problem to be 100 billion as a global problem. They also described it like 556 million victims was been compromised per year. That's a very huge number. Verizon data breach report which came out, it highlighted that identifying that you've been compromised or you've been hacked and your data is being breached, that itself takes like more than 2 weeks or maybe months to first get identified, right? The other firm, which actually is an open firm, it did a study and it said that the breaches, a single breach cost nearly 9 million. So we're not talking about here somebody who is actually interested in hacking probably your credit card numbers or probably your bank account details. Because, I mean, if that has been hacked today, probably the damage is not that much. The advanced targeted attack is nothing to do with your personal financial stuff. It is more targeted towards the organization. It is more targeted toward the government, on what governments are doing, what policies they are planning to run across. Our report, our threat, when I say our, it is our FireEye threat, advanced threat report, which came out earlier this year, which we analyzed the entire stuff for the last year, mentioned that every 3 minutes we are seeing a new malware coming out. So the malcode is being changing every 3 minutes. There's a new variant being out, and that's why it is very difficult to detect a malware. The attackers are very smart. They're fooling the users. They try to send something to the users which excites them, right? Which they click, which they try to browse, and then they get compromised, right? So there's a different type of attack which has been driven, and we'll go into much more deeper into that in next few slides. So what is this next generation threats, or what is this advanced targeted attack, right? So some gentleman asked about about the Mandan report in the presentation when my friend Manas was doing. Yeah, I mean, Mandan report which came out earlier this year clearly pointed that China is behind that. And once that happened, every country is now blaming it back to China. Why? Because 85% of the callbacks infrastructure is been either hosted in China or been hosted in another countries and is been managed by China, right? What is this advanced targeted attacks, or where the name APT came from? So the APT terminology comes from advanced persistence threat. Now US can today clearly say that China is attacking them or China is compromising them, but earlier they were not able to. So they came up with an acronymous which is an APT, advanced persistent threat. So whenever they see there's been an attack happening from China to their government, to their organization, they dealt it as a name which is called as APT. So what is the goal of the APT? The goal of the APT is completely different from the traditional attack. So how does a traditional attack looks like? Now a traditional attack, when you talk about a worm, Trojan, or a known backdoor, right? It is very simple. Those attacks are like open. When I say open, you can see that your network utilization are either going up, your machines are probably going down, And then your administrators are able to figure out there's some problem, right? And they can work out of that. They can call up a vendor and try to look into the solution. So that's how the traditional attacks are, right? They are known. So once you get it patched, that attack has been gone. That attack never happens again, right? That's how the traditional attack is. And the traditional attacks are normally like one time. Like if you look at Slammer, probably it was there for 1 year or so, and when you patched it in 2005 and 2006, there's never Slammer came out, right? Conflicker, 2008, there's a variant of Conflicker still being there, but once you've patched, you've been protected. But when you talk about advanced targeted attacks or APTs, the goal of this attack are to remain in stealth. That's their goal. They will remain in your organization for as long as they want to remain there, right? They will work in stealth. That's their mode of operation. They come in your organization using unknown vulnerabilities, exploits in the applications what you use onto your desktop, right? And they are persistent, which means they will keep on trying and hitting you till they get inside of your network. So I put up a few points here. This comes from Microsoft Security Bulletin for May 2013, right? So every month, second week, Tuesday, Microsoft comes out with a patch release. That's been called as a Black Tuesday because you need to patch, right? And if you follow these patches, and if you follow these patches for maybe 1.5 years, 2 years, look at all those patches, what it is talking about. Microsoft Word can be used to execute remote code, right? You look at their link as that's the same time, right? That's been used to run remote code. Windows Explorer can be used to run remote code. If you look at the below there, it's Microsoft Visio that's been used to allow information disclosure, right? And the last part over there is the kernel, which helps you to allow elevations of privileges. So what is this hackers looking at, or what is this APT writers looking at? They are looking at only 3 points, right? Remote code execution. Remote code execution on what? The applications, the operating systems, what you use, right? And once they run this remote code execution, they have the goal to pull the data out. That's your information disclosure. And they want to elevate the privileges. So many of the users who use the desktop probably are running in power user or maybe in user mode. They never run in the administrative mode. So those days have gone where you give the access to the end user as administrator. But when you do an Alt Control Delete on your machine and you looked into your task manager, you'll still find few processes running there as an administrator, because that's how the operating systems are being designed. So there's a kernel 0, that's the 0 level where the kernel has been running, and then there's the user which is on the level 3, right? So these hackers use these 0-day vulnerabilities to probably get into the kernel mode where they can then maybe control your machine, maybe move from one machine to another once they have the administrative access. So who are these guys, right? I mean, these are not a scripty kiddie who is sitting in a cyber cafe and probably doing that. So the Mandiant report which came out this year, right, actually opened it to everybody, right? It's the Public Liberation Army, right? That's the PLA. It's the China army doing that, right? And that's been happening all across years. Now the reports are been clearly out and it's been pointing to the army. So the APTs are normally driven by nations. It's been nation targeted attack. Now these guys only have 2 goals. They are looking at an information what they can use to improve their defense, right? So they'll get inside of your organization and look into the information which will help to improve their defense, or probably look at the data which will help them to provide it to their commercial industry. So imagine like our government might have done some research and have spent like 2-3 years doing that research and have that data. So now the government is planning to come out with a plan to execute on the research data, right? Chinese got hacked into that government organization, would have taken that data out. So now they know what government is planning, what is the government plan, right, to come out with some scheme, right? And probably they will launch that scheme, build that product and send it to that country or that state. And that's how they are killing the industry and making their footprints into the global market. And that's why you see Chinese everywhere selling their products damn cheap because they're not spending money on research. They're collecting this data of research. They're collecting this data of research by doing this. So their army is supporting them in dual way. Try to capture those information, try to use it as per their defense policy, or probably pass it to their commercial industry so that their economy will become stable. So I'll run you through few examples which have happened in real near past, right? I'm not talking about something which is like 3 years or 4 years. So the operation here, what we've traced about is the operation BBuzz. We've been tracing this operation for almost like 2 years, right? The fundamental of this operation was very clear. A weaponized email was being sent to an high delegate in the defense, right? With the subject, and which has a PDF which talks about the salary guidelines, right? So think about that you get an email on your mailbox and talks about your salary guidelines, right? The first intent, being a human, will go and open that PDF. Because your anti-spam solution has allowed that, your AV has not caught that PDF, right? You're going to open that, right? And that's what they want to do. They're using a 0 day, which means your traditional security solutions are not going to detect that. So once you click on that email, right, it executes maybe a DLL or it calls for a DLL depending upon how that 0 day has been crafted. So the vulnerability of the application or the operating system has been used and a dropper has been dropped onto your machine. So this can be again maybe an executable code embedded inside the PDF, right? Or it can be a callback getting the dropper back. Depends upon how that attack has been crafted. But here in this case, it was actually a shell code which was inside the PDF, which was using the 0 day vulnerability. Now once that PDF got into his machine, it opened an encrypted channel as a callback channel, right? And that's where the data exploitation starts. So this type of attacks are probably called as multi-vector attack. Why? Because you got the attack from SMTP. And now your callbacks are happening from HTTP. Now this HTTP callback can be encrypted, can be XOR, can be RC4, depending upon what that guy has written in his code, right? But it is 100% going to execute on your machine because it's been used by a 0 day vulnerability, which is still not been patched, okay? And since we were tracking this around, we saw this first instance in 2011. But if you look at, since we were tracking this all across, we've seen this instance been running till earlier this year, right? And if you look at the subject or probably the attachment name kept on changing. The data inside the attachment kept on changing because then it was sent to different industries, from defense to aerospace to manufacturers. But the goal was only one thing, to get inside of your network, and which traditional security signature-based solutions wouldn't be able to block, right? So, I mean, if it's been sent to somebody who is looking at for security predictions for the next year, and that's the PDF he's looking at, and if he gets that PDF via email, he's going to open that. If somebody is interested in human rights, if he gets that PDF, he's going to open that. And that's what we've been seeing about the targeted attack. So again, the key takeaways from here, from this attack, is this is nation-driven attack. Right? It's an army sitting across the border, right? So even if you catch that attachment, they're 100% sure that you're not going to fly back to China, that the gentleman was just saying, right? I mean, there's no way you can go and say, and go back to China and say, why you sent me this, right? So their work is to get inside of your organization, inside of the government agency, because that's their work is. So today, if you don't open that attachment, tomorrow they'll send you something or the other. And that's why these threats are very persistent. They always use a 0 day, right? And that's why you see the patches being coming up in every security software, any security application you use, right? And patching is always a catching race, right? So that 0 day time frame is what these guys use to maybe exploit, right? The callbacks are probably encrypted, which means now you're doing an HTTPS channel out, or you're doing an XOR, or you're doing an obfuscation and sending the data out, which your firewall, web security solution, whichever solution you deploy, is not going to identify, right? Because it's that you have a file. Now if you're trying to upload that file via malware, and if you have a DLP solution being deployed, the DLP solution will catch that. But now if you have XORed that file, or you have obfuscated that file, or you have encrypted that file, and you're trying to send it, right, then probably the DLP solution wouldn't be able to catch that. So this is another attack, what is now been referred as watering hole attack. So it's like rather than attacking an organization, they go and compromise a website which interests few government officials. Maybe here, this is the website what we are referring over here is Council of Foreign Relations, the crf.org. Who goes and visits this website? So in US, every delegate who has been interested in foreign policy will go and visit this website. Any secretary, ambassadors of those secretaries are going to visit this website. Why did Chinese went and attack that? Because they wanted to know who are the guys probably working on the foreign policies, right? Who are those guys? What are they working on, right? So how do they come to know? So they will not come to know that, right? So you go into that website, compromise that website. When I say compromise that website, you don't need to hack that complete website. What you probably need to do is only put maybe an iframe. In this case, they just put a JavaScript, right? Now think about that. You're going and accessing this web page, right? You're getting a JavaScript, right? Which security solution which you have deployed on your architecture will scan this JavaScript, will actually execute this JavaScript? None. Because if you block JavaScript, if you block Flash, or if you block JPEG, your websites are not going to work, right? Now this JavaScript was so properly crafted that it will only execute first time when it ran in the machine. So it has the capability to look at what language the user is using, what operating system is using, what application he has, and whether it has been the first time he's accessing via IP or via host name, right? So once it ran on the user's machine, it sent two files onto the user's machine. One was the Flash, the other was the JPEG, right? Now this JPEG file had a code embedded inside it. So if you open this JPEG file, you are going to see an image. And even if you double click on that JPEG file, there's nothing going to happen on your machine, right? Because it is a JPEG file. It has an embedded code. Who knows where that code is and how to execute that in the machine? That's the key. So that was actually written on that JavaScript. So now JavaScript knows that here's because once that JPEG has been sent, it is going to go in your temp folder. So then it knows there's a temp file, there's a file inside of your temp folder, and inside that file from here to here, there's an instruction of how to run that code, how to XOR it, and then probably run inside of your memory. And once it is able to do that, it then does a callback back to the internet. So today's threats are not only just getting drive-by downloads, it's about managing it of how it can be efficiently run on the machine, and nobody is aware of that. Because once you get this botnet, these botnets do not send data out like it will, or whenever you have your security solution, it will not even alert, because it's like one beaconing what it will do, or probably it will keep on sending data in parts, and they'll send data only in fractions. So if you remember keylogger, which has been there for years, earlier keylogger used to capture everything what has been typed on the machine and used to send it. But today's the advanced malware keylogger will only capture first 60 bytes when you open a browser, because the intention is that you're now accessing your webmail, and probably in first 60 characters your username and password has been captured, right? Or you're opening an application which is your internal portal, and then first 60 characters your username and password would be punched. So they're only capturing that and doing an exploitation out using XOR or using different mechanism, right? So that's how the data exploitation has been happening. And then once the machine has been exploited, definitely the malware laterally needs to move in the organization and then maybe infect the entire organization. So we saw this attack, and this is the real attack, on December 21st. When we say we saw, it's not our researchers who saw. Our plans itself have the capability of detecting it. So our appliance detected it, and on 21st December 2012, we intimated Microsoft that it is a 0-day vulnerability on IE8. IE8 is the most used browser in 2012, right? So 0-day vulnerability. Microsoft came out with a workaround on December 31st, right? A 10-day window. The 10-day window when the first workaround was given, right? And then they patched this vulnerability with a patch, definitely, which comes on the second week of every Tuesday, which was on like, 14 Jan. So that's a 25-day period where people are vulnerable with 0-day, right? That's after we seeing that, which when it was happening in one of the defense organization where our solutions was being deployed. So that's what the case of 0-day is all about, right? So if you don't see the exploitation, there is no way you will come to know how they are exploiting the vulnerability and how the data exploitation has been happening, because the data exploitation is completely happening on encryption, right? Or different mechanisms like XOR, obfuscation, depending upon how they have written it, right? And hence the key is to catch the exploit phase. So let's look into deep of what's happening in the industry. So if you look at the compromise window, again this is from Verizon data breach report, right? So if you look at the compromise, so on the top it is the time factor, and on the maybe the left of yours is probably the states from compromise to the end restoration. So if you look at this graph, the compromise probably happens in seconds, hours or minutes once you first get that 0-day. The data exfiltration always starts, which is the second stage, which always starts in minutes and hours, right? To get to know that you've been compromised, right, is this always in weeks or probably in months, because it is a 0-day, right? Or unless and until that data has been utilized, and then you come to know that the data has already been utilized, and that's where you come to know that I've been already breached, because it's a 0-day malware. Similarly was the case of New York Times. If you remember that, they had 45 variants of malware sitting in their organization for 6 months, right? And AV was only able to catch one. And that's where Mandan did that, the entire story, and pulled it out, that excellent report. Why I'm referring to Mandan over here is because they definitely used our appliances. The Mandan chairman, Mr. Dave DeWalt, is our CEO and chairman of our organization. So I'll come back to our organization. So look, once the people understand that they've been breached, once you've been breached, you even don't know how to maybe get back to the restoration, because like that madam rightly asked about, probably you may need individuals who have this capability to understand malware and then to make sure how to clean that malware. But malware is always changing, so probably you'll not get those individuals unless and until you are certain, because they have those expertise, right? So probably you're dependent, you don't know, so you go to the consultants, and hence the restoration from day one till day last takes a lot. Takes a lot of time, and that's where that's always in months and weeks, right? And that's the pain what an industry have today in the terms of APT attack, and that's where the data exploitation are so common. Australian spy HQ blueprints going out to China, it's that serious, right? In India, the problem is that even when this happens, nobody comes and tells you in open, because that gentleman rightly said, right? Everybody is worried that media will make a fun of that, but that's not the, that's the pain, right? Nobody comes and says that's a real problem. But when we do our research, we definitely see that's a very big problem. So what has happened today is this: when you talk about these advanced targeted attacks or APTs, they've been designed to breach whatever security infrastructure you have built. Why? Because this army sitting there have already access to all these appliances, right? They know, and none of these appliances are being designed to fight malware. Firewall, IPS, probably yes, to protect you from outside to inside. Web security has its own job. It has to do URL filtering. AV has its own job, and it's doing that best. None of this was being designed scratch from ground to look at malware. And hence that leaves a big hole in the security architecture where you get this spear phishing email to your mailbox, or you get this link or a malicious file downloaded at home back into your network, right, via USB, and that can have malicious malware. So that's the whole what we are talking about. So today's traditional model of security is always been signature based. So what is a signature based? So you know a threat, you've done a research, you got a sample, right, and looking at that sample you created a signature. So once you have that signature, if you see that again, it's easy to block, right? But like if it is a one-to-one attack, nobody is going to see that sample in the industry. It's been just sent to you as a targeted attack. So how will the signature come? That's where you'd find this 0 days. There's no signatures for that. And unless and until you provide that sample to the security vendor, probably he'll not have the signatures, right? Because nobody has seen that attack to write the signature. And that's where the signature-based models are failing today. The other part of the signature-based model is heuristic, which the industry has again added. Now heuristic is again a scoring mechanism. Depending upon what has been happening, a score has been allocated. Again, the gun has been given at your hand so that you shoot a score and you say 80 is what my score is. So whatever above 80 is bad. Whatever below 80 is good, or whatever that number you choose, right? And that adds a lot of false positive. And that's why IPS probably never goes in line, because there's a lot of false positive it has been generating. So what is needed today? What is needed today is a new model, a new virtual execution model, which is signatureless, which has the capability to look into these PDFs, to look into this content, which is coming to your organization as a targeted attack. Execute it as a virtual user, right? Write signatures on its own. So you don't need a security expert to write a signature, because the appliance has to do that job for you, right? When it sees a 0 day, it has to write that signature on itself and then start protecting you from there itself, right? So that's the model what we are talking about here. And also, it definitely needs to have a minimal false positive, because if the appliance is writing the signature and there's a lot of false positive, nobody is going to use that, right? So that's again the main point. So for that, we've created the platform. So now I'm not talking about the product, we're talking about the platform, which tries to help you. We are not only limited to the files. We look into the complete session of what user has been generating or creating. Why? Because today's targeted attack may happen only one time. Like you got a web page, you got the JavaScript, and that JavaScript is going to only come to you maybe on the first time when you're accessing it, right? And that's why we ran the complete virtualization of that complete session rather than simply looking into the object. So if I'm only looking into the object, I would have looked into that JPEG in the case of the crf.org, and then JPEG would be just a file. So there's no way we would have find the exploit. So we look at the complete session and identify that. What we also do is we do the multi-vector analysis. When we talk about the multi-vector analysis, we look at email, we look at web, we also look at the files which you can bring via USB. So you download it at home and bought it and put it on a file server, right? And we also look at your mobile apps. If you have mobile apps and you want a protection to that. The most important part is also we do is the correlations of this threat intelligence. So we'll let you know this came via an email, and now that has been compromised, this many of your users or this many of your users were already compromised, and here is the data exploitation is happening, and this is how it has been happening to wherever it has been happening. We also have, being a security solution, you need to have a cloud infrastructure. So you also get the updates from the cloud. And the most important part over there is this all happens in real time. So you don't need your admin to go and do something. When you see a threat, our appliance creates the signatures, publishes that signatures to all your FireEye devices been placed on your network, and it's in the protection mode. So it starts protecting you, right? And that's all happens in real time.